Alrighty, in this video we're going to be looking at creating different graphical displays for different data sets. I found that these three are three of the most common that you will come across, especially in the essential math syllabus, which is just targeted towards, but I mean you can use these graphs for any application in school or outside in the real world. Okay, so let's get into it. So the first one we're going to be looking at here is a column graph, and this is going to be because we have categories, so categorical data, and some frequencies for those categorical data. So each of these colors of car in this made-up instance is going to be a column, and the frequency values are going to tell us how high that column goes. So once you've got data such as this, to create the column graph, it's very simple. Highlight the top left, including the heading, so car color, and drag all the way down to the bottom right. Now, if you have data that goes all the way down to say like row 100 and you can't see it all to drag, there's a shortcut you can do. You can click the top left. Now hold Control and Shift, which I'm doing on my keyboard, press right on the arrow pad, and then press down. And it's going to select everything in that group of data, and it's going to stop once it sees some empty cells. So for example, over here, if I wanted to do it for line graph, Control Shift, hold it, press right, and then down, and it will select everything for you. Nice little shortcut. So I'm going to select everything by using that shortcut. Then I'm going to go up to this Insert tab here, click Insert. Then I'm going to head over to Column Graph. Now you can go Recommended Charts and select from there. I'll show you how to do that. So then you click All Charts and click Column. And then I'm going to click, there's two different ones. There's a color one and a normal one. I'm going to select normal for a very clear reason. I'll explain that. So I'm going to select the normal chart. It's selected now, so I'm going to click OK. And here is my chart here. So I'm going to double click in this frequency bit here, and I'm going to title my graph straight away. Column graph for, let's say, car color. I won't even title it column graph. Let's go car colors, and that's good enough for title for me. Now, blue, white, black, red, yellow, other. The heights of these columns match these numbers here. One thing that I'm going to point out before moving on is that you can change these individual column colors if you'd like, which I think is a good idea for this instance. So blue is already blue, that's good. White isn't white. Now I don't want to make it white because the background is white, but I might make it a gray. So if I double click or triple click, so if I click once, it selects all of my columns. So what I want to do is click once and then click again, and it's just selected the white column. Now I can right click and bring up this menu and fill. I want to fill this to be, say a gray, like a really light gray. Okay, that's going to change the color of just one of these guys. I can do it for the rest of them, so click once to select all, click once again to select black, right click, fill black. I can do it with the rest, right click, red, down here, it's a decent red, yellow, I'll make it yellow, and other, maybe because I don't have a green, I'll make it greenish. You can make it whatever you want, but there you go. So now these columns match these colors. It doesn't always work because you're not always using colors, but in this instance it does. If you want to manipulate this a bit more, you can click, and then over here you'll see 3 bars. That's the series options, and you can change some stuff. For example, if you want to make the gap smaller, you can click this drag slider and then drag it left, and it's going to make the gap between each column smaller, which inherently is making the columns themselves fatter. If you like the look of that more, feel free to go for that. One thing we should always do is when we're thinking about graphing, we need salt, scale, axes, labels, titles. So what I'm missing here is some axes labels. So I'm going to click Add Chart Element. I'm going to go Axes Titles. I'm going to go Primary Horizontal. Another thing you can do is click this plus button. This is at least on PC. Mac will be very similar. And you can go Axes Titles like this as well. This is going to just be frequency here. Change the title here to frequency. Change this title here to color. That'll do. And there we go. That's a pretty good graph if you ask me. Column graph done. Okay, next one we're looking at is a histogram. Now you'll notice that I have heights here. And if you're doing it by hand or in an assignment or something, you're going to have a frequency table. But Excel doesn't work super good with frequency tables. Excel can do the thing that your frequency table does in the background. So right here, I have just a list of heights, right? There's like 20 6 or 27 heights or something like that. If we were doing it by hand, we would be looking at the heights and grouping them into class intervals, say 150 to 160, 160 to 170, and so on. Excel doesn't need that. So if you're making your histogram in Excel, just put the raw data in. I'm going to select it all, go Insert, and then I'm going to be looking at this statistic chart here, which is a histogram. Okay, so it's created me a histogram. I'm going to move it just over here for the time being. And I'm going to change the chart title straight away. I'm going to call this, say we're doing it for a school class, we'll say class heights. Okay, now the main thing we want to adjust here is the width and number of columns in your histogram. So down the bottom here, we can see that it's automatically generated class intervals of 159 centimeters to 169, 169 to 179. And I'm going to zoom in here because there's a small nuance bit here. You'll notice that some of them are like just regular parentheses and some of them are square brackets. The square brackets mean inclusive. The parentheses or the normal bracket mean doesn't include it, right? So this one here has got 159 to 169, right? Any of them. So if I zoom out just a little bit, if I've got a 159 here, that is going to be included here. So I think I've got a 169 as well up here. That is also included here. This one includes the 169, but this one over here, because it has the curved bracket, doesn't include 169. It's from anything above 169 up to 179. Just if you were interested in why some are curved, some are square. Okay, now if you click on these labels here, you'll bring up these options again, and it might look like this initially, but we'll go axes options, and this is just the automatic setup for, they call them bins, right? We call them class intervals, but whatever you call them, they're the same thing. So if you want a specific width, say you want them to be in 10 centimeter groups, right? These are all centimeters. So bin width, it's 10. It's automatically set up to be 10 actually. Let's say you wanted them in 5 centimeter groups. Just change this number to a 5 and hit enter, and it will now group them in 5 centimeters. So it's a bit more specific, I suppose. If you went something like 20, it would be very unspecific, right? You don't get that much information. If you went 1, it's just going to be a list of all the heights. So it's not as useful either. So somewhere between 5 and 10 seems appropriate. Or the number of bins should be between 5 and 10 also. Any more than 10, let's say 15, it's okay, but it's probably too specific. You'll notice there's a couple of empty columns starting to exist. If we go 10 bins, then it's a bit more useful. 7 to 8 is a really good number, I think. Good rule of thumb. Or set your bin width to be something specific. That's preferable for something like height. Number of bins might be preferable for something like salary or something like that. One other thing about the histogram is you've got overflow and underflow bins, which just mean you can make the bottom and the top column, I suppose, or the bin just be anything less than or greater than a number. So I might want to say the overflow bin can be any heights above 190. And the underflow bin can be anything under, say, 160. And then I'm going to just make it automatic after that. So for some reason, this bin hasn't appeared. So let me try that again. Axes options, underflow. I made it 16, not 160. So 160 there. And now I have 5 bins. I might increase the number of bins to 7. Which is going to give me an underflow bin, so everything under 160, an overflow bin, anything over 190, and then bins in the middle here. So it looks like they're going up in 6 centimeter increments, which is fine for me. You can change this to whatever you like, but that's a bit of how to use an a histogram and create one. Notice the only difference is Excel doesn't create this half column width gap at the start for a histogram, which we want. So feel free to use another website or hand drawer if you insist on having that gap. I think it looks pretty good regardless. Alrighty, now I'm just going to move this maybe up here and zoom it in because I have one more graph to create and we're looking at a line graph here. So remember, line graphs are typically used for time series data. So here I've got day numbers 1 through 30. So say for example this is a month and we're looking at the temperature across that month. just like the column graph, we're going to highlight, I might move this over here so it's next to the histogram. We're going to highlight all of this data, so Control Shift, right, down, and then we're going to insert. Now, there is a line graph option, except it creates this like double line graph, which is not what we want. We want these two things interacting, not as separate graphs. So we don't click that, we click this scatter plot chart, and you could just do a scatter plot, which is fine, but I'm going to use this option here, which is scatter with straight lines and markers, and create my plot like this. It's already named it temperature. If you wanted to be more specific, you could, like temperature throughout May or whatever month you're looking at. And the only other thing I want to change, now you can leave it at 0 and start it at 0. We talk about how you should always start at 0 if you don't want to bias the graph. But in this case, I want the graph to fill up the entire scale. So I want the scale to be right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click here, or just single click, and go to the axis options here, axis options again, and I want to change the minimum, right? This is temperature on the left. I want to change the minimum temperature to something that's more appropriate, right? So if I look down the list here, I can see I've got like a 21. Now, I can't see anything in the teens, so I might make the minimum temperature 20. Okay, which just spreads out my graph a bit, so it's a bit more easy to see trends and changes. Of course, this can bias your data, so just be wary of that. My maximum looks okay. Just quickly looking through, it looks like a 34 might be the top temperature. That looks about right. So one thing you can do if you want as well to make it more precise is to change this to say 35, only one tick above, but that's not necessary. Also, we've only got 30 days, not 35. So if I click the bottom axis, I can change the maximum to say 30 days. And that's going to spread my graph out horizontally nicely. And now I can use this is a time series chart to look at the trends over time. So the month appears to start out quite warm, and then it gets quite cold towards the middle / end, and then it spikes back in temperature again. So we had a bit of a cold patch, but that's the interpretation stuff. But excuse me, for now, we want to add, just like on every graph, I didn't do it with the histogram, I should have, but add the axis titles. And then, of course, we've got on the vertical axes, we have temperature for a time series. We have day number, I guess. All right, cool. And then we've got a time series graph. That was an introduction about creating graphs. We've created a column graph of car colors. We created a histogram of heights of students in a class and temperature throughout a month. So hope that helped.